In a way, it was fun. It was like almost like, I mean, if anyone has the means to kind of like unpack their 20s by making a film where you're kind of playing with this stuff, it was very therapeutic in a way, but also kind of nerve-wracking, on set.
Hi, my name's James Lattimer. I'm a programmer at the Berlinale Forum, and I'm very happy to be talking to Ephraim Asili today about his film, The Inheritance. First of all, thank you very, very much for agreeing to take part in the interview and for chatting to us about the film. It's a real pleasure also for me to kind of find out some more things. So could we maybe start by, can you maybe just describe The Inheritance in like 2 or 3 sentences?
Probably not, but I'll try.
Go for it.
Two or three sentences. The Inheritance is what's left of a private meditation on many elders that I admire passing away.
I read that you described the film as I think, a speculative reenactment of your own time in a West Philadelphia collective. So I'd be interested to know a little bit about the sort of the degree of speculation, as it were, because I think what I like so much about the film is it feels very grounded in a kind of real life setting or a real life sort of everydayness. But on the other hand, it also feels incredibly kind of, I mean, looking at the walls, looking at the way in which the house is constructed, it's very artificial. So I'd be interested to know, yeah, sort of the portion of your own real life experience that was put into the film.
Yeah, yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, it's a great question. When I started writing this piece, like I was saying, this premise was kind of how can I activate my archive? I was blanking on the name of my film before. Fluid Frontiers was the film I'm
Oh, okay.
referring to, where I'm, taking these books of poetry and having people read them, right? Over the years, I've accumulated all of this stuff, and I was really thinking about how to again activate it. And I was also curious in just making a narrative film. And so I'm thinking about this, and this sort of obvious thing pops into my mind. I lived in a sort of like radical collective for all of these years. What if I kind of combine what I'm doing now with those experiences? So like I never actually inherited a house filled with all this wonderful stuff. That would have been great, but it never happened. I never inherited a house at all, in fact. And so I was kind of like reflecting on that moment and some of the situations, and then obviously this was somewhere around 2015, 2016. The political climate around the world and, was from the United States getting very ugly in terms of this rise of fascism. And I was very much thinking, what would my collective life be like under these kind of current
Mm.
political conditions? And all this stuff is kind of swirling around, and that's how it kind of found its way into it. And so the degree to which the reenactments, it's like many of the situations, I lived in a collective where you had different people, representative of different parts of the African diaspora in terms of ethnicity, but also class, all living in this really kind of unique environment where we were kind of self-educating, and doing a lot of the things that you see happening in the film, but the details and the scenarios, they're totally fabricated. My first impulse was to kind of try to create a house or a feeling that looked like where I lived in Philadelphia in detail. But then I decided to kind of slide back from that, kind of studying more set design, particularly like a lot of European New Wave set design, which was actually a lot of location shooting. But looking at a lot of the European location shooting, it's like, how do you kind of get the idea of a domesticated kitchen across without filling it with crap? And so I
Sure.
really tried to think specifically about set design, just one or two things here. And then if occasionally I really fill out the space and kind of really thinking of the set design as a sort of character of the film, but also putting that character in contrast to the kind of realism of the acting and how that feels. Um, let the acting feel almost documentary and let the set feel fake, kind of feeling, and that you kind of arrive at what hopefully feels like narrative in that
Mm.
mix.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think it does. I mean, one very sort of prominent aspect of the mise en scène is the kind of, I mean, and it in a sense refers to what you were just talking about, is the post of La Chinoise, the Godard film. And I was kind of, I mean, you already talked about maybe the influence of kind of, like a European, like 60s art film, like style. But I mean, obviously, kind of placing that poster kind of up front and center in the film, and in a sense, by doing so, maybe inviting certain comparisons, because I think there are kind of links between the inheritance and La Chinoise. I'd be interested to know what role that film has for you, or kind of why you also, I mean, not just maybe the role it has for you, but also why you decided to put that in the film itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely great question. I mean, kind of like you're asking kind of like the origins of the film earlier in the interview, and one of those things that was also a factor, I've been making short, so-called experimental films for a window of time, and I wanted to make a feature, and so and I think just about all filmmakers, if what's your feature idea? Everyone has one, whether they actually want to do it or not, different story, but everyone has one, and mine had always been something revolving around the time I had lived in a collective. When I was a film student, I went to film school after leaving the collective, so my whole experience with making films was after kind of living in this radical collective and discovering European art house cinema was something that happened in film school for me. And so seeing the work of Godard was something that happened in film school, and I was the kind of student that would see one film by person and go to the library and get all of their films. And so when I
Ah.
finally got to chinoise, I said, wait, this is really wild because this is like his version of what I had lived, but it seemed very palpable, just even as a novice filmmaker, that maybe that filmmaker had no experience with that particular thing. Like it was something intriguing to the director, but not their lived experience. And I really thought about this idea even then of like, well, what would this film look like made from someone who'd actually kind of lived it? And then furthermore, um, some of the reasons why that film is attacked, or some of the reasons that I think I love it, is that there's a sort of naivete about the sort of the politics. For me, I read it very much as a part of those characters and sort of JLG looking at this situation and maybe kind of seeing some of the more superficial aspects of it at the time. But for whatever that's worth, I really wanted to make something in terms of my version that wasn't so much a critique of the original, but really trying to place itself in the shoes of people living in that particular situation. And so something like in that film that I get a kick out of every time I watch it is the sort of closing lines of Shunyawasa are like kind of something along, it's like a, and that was a wonderful summer, and then we went back to school and lived happily ever after. And that's how that film feels. It was like, wow, they were really hot and heavy about the Little Red Book for a summer. And then, it had, petered out, right? And I thought, I wanted to kind of do the opposite, where it's like they're kind of getting deeper and deeper into the situation and then stopping there. And so there was sort of not so much critiques, but things I would always kind of ask myself, what would I do different about that film without like making it like a copycat film?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think maybe one key difference between the two films is kind of the way in which that you incorporate. I mean, we talked already a little bit about the actors, and also how they were kind of integral to the process. But I think it's also interesting how you then incorporate real life people into the setting, which obviously Godard doesn't do. And so I'd be interested to know a little bit about how you kind of involve them in the process and the sort of the working process with them. I'm talking about Sonia Sanchez, talking about Ursula Rucker, and also, the sort of former members of the MOVE organization, because obviously their presence in that setting gives a very different feeling in terms of, because they're not acting per se. They are also, they're kind of being themselves in that space and giving a different feel to that space by their mere presence.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that was in the back of my mind throughout the writing process. When it became clear to me that I could not shoot in Philadelphia on location, my first concern then went, well, how can I make the space become Philadelphia? And my sort of best idea was to just bring people that I would want to incorporate into the project to the set in upstate New York and
Mm.
have them participate. But in terms of the impulse, actually, here I go again, but the JLG nerd stuff. But in La Chinoise, there's a scene at the end. There's this, where the young woman from the collective is riding on a train, and she's debating one of her professors about the use of violence and the radical gesture. From what I understand, that was actually a real lawyer that had been defending, I believe, Algerians who
Mm.
had been accused, and that back and forth in some ways was a sort of like realist thing. And that's actually, it's weird. He gets less credit for doing that than a lot of other people because he doesn't draw a lot of attention to the fact that people,
Mm.
but I've always been interested in that, even in films like, is that Made in the USA, you know, the Jane Fonda film, um, where it's like she's playing a character, but it's also very clear that you're breaking down, and it's just Jane Fonda trying to negotiate a Godard film, and that tension was something that was very, very compelling. And so again, this idea that I'm trying to create a narrative, but I have this documentary impulse and kind of really trying to muck up that situation in a way was something I really wanted to play with. And I was also interested to the degree that the real people were okay with kind of playing into my narrative. And so, you know, like with the move people, rather than just like shoot it like a documentary, like that they feel as though they are actually in the house of Ubuntu and are talking to this collective. And so those were the sort of blurred lines that I was interested in. The same with the cast for that matter. Half of the cast are, you know, professional actors, but some of the younger people in the collective, they were actually students from my courses that I teach that are interested in acting and performance, but that I really wanted to actually have a group of people who are in their early 20s who are new to these ideas, and the education that they're getting in the film is actually quite real. And so for them, that presence of meeting real move people on camera, you know, and all of
Mm.
that happening within a sort of narrative context was for me something that was like really important. And so I'm always interested in that thing where you're placing people kind of in these other sort of contexts, yeah, and seeing how it works or it doesn't work sometimes.
No, I think that kind of, I mean, that sort of combination of people from very different kind of fields all coming together in that space and in a sense sort of mutually influencing one another in that space because of that, because they are all kind of have been placed there in a sense for different reasons or are acting a different role or not acting a different role accordingly. Yeah, I think, I mean, I think you really feel that kind of, that energy or that, those sparks kind of flying in the film as a result.
Yeah, and that was the sort of like in terms of me and in terms of experimentation, and we were talking like who are my main collaborators, and I was saying like well the actors like kind of being okay with all of that and just like really allowing themselves. It's one thing if you're a professional and you're kind of trained to kind of go through your process, but for some of the younger actors, just to kind of like really be open and vulnerable in a very deep and just like it's totally authentic way in my process was really key. You know, it's like the reason I wanted to explore narrative is because I feel like I've gotten to a point in my filmmaking where some of the things, psychological states that I'm interested in, it would feel so invasive to do it in a documentary way, with
Sure.
maybe someone who's not totally willing to go there or doesn't totally understand my motives. And so to get people who are acting and willing to kind of go there with me was like a real treat. You know?
No, well, thank you very much for taking the time. It was a real pleasure to chat to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be included in the Berlinale's first time. And so, yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.